Hey everybody, it's Ed. Before we get started, I wanted to make sure you were aware of my weekly email that I've been sending out every single Wednesday for almost 5 years now. It's called Good News from the American West, and it is only good news. There's nothing in there that'll make you mad, nothing in there that'll make you outraged or furious, which is rare when you look at the news these days. I started sending it out just because I was trying to focus on more positive things. And so every Wednesday, I send out this email. It's probably anywhere from 5 to 8 bullet points of things that will hopefully make you smile or laugh or potentially get you a new job. But a lot of positive things that I think will hopefully make your day a little bit better. No pressure to sign up. I know that we all get enough emails as it is, but if you're looking for a little bit of positivity every Wednesday, you can follow the link in the episode notes. Thanks so much. This is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. My guest today is Betsy Gaines Quammen. Betsy is a Montana-based historian and writer whose work explores the history and myths of the American West and how those stories have shaped life in the region today. Betsy joined me on the podcast several years ago to talk about her amazing book, American Zion, Clive and Bundy, God, and Public Lands in the West. And since then, she's published another must-read. It's called True West, Myth and Mending on the Far Side of America. In True West, Betsy meets face-to-face with a wide range of folks here in the West, from militia members to hardcore environmentalists, and seeks to understand why they believe what they do. Combining these conversations with her deep understanding of history, Betsy's able to demonstrate the fascinating complexity and contradictions that define many of the people and issues in today's West. We recorded this conversation on stage at the 2024 Old Salt Festival, where Betsy was nice enough to join us for the 3-day festival of music, food, and conversation. As you'll hear me say in the episode, Betsy and her work have played a huge role in my never-ending quest to try and understand this region, and I consider her to be a great friend and mentor. But even if you don't have any interest in the West history or modern-day conflicts, there are big lessons to be learned from Betsy's approach to her work. She's committed to finding the humanity in everyone, even people she completely disagrees with. Rather than attack them and their ideas, she approaches them with genuine curiosity, really trying to understand what they believe and why. And even when no common ideological ground can be found, there's still mutual respect. And I think most people will agree that we need more of these types of respectful interactions these days. So in this conversation, we talk a bit about Betsy's background and why she's so interested in understanding myths and the American West. We talk about her commitment to having deep conversations with people across political and socio-economic spectrums, and she describes one of the unlikely friendships she built with a man whose views on politics, public lands, and the environment could not be further from her own. We discuss the importance of getting off the internet and having face-to-face conversations, how real estate development is changing the ecology and economics of the West, her thoughts on the future, and much more. We also took a bunch of questions from the audience, which was a lot of fun. Again, I can't thank Betsy enough for joining me on stage for this conversation, but more importantly, for the wisdom she shared with me over the years. If you haven't read True West, I encourage you to pick up a copy as soon as you can, and I'd also encourage you to listen to our first conversation, where Betsy talks a lot about her life and her career journey. And tickets for the 2025 Old Salt Festival are on sale now. So if you'd like to experience conversations like this one in person, plus music, food, Western makers, and more, follow the link in the episode notes and grab your tickets. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoy. Thank you all so much for coming to this session. I really, really appreciate it. My name's Ed Robertson. I started a podcast about 8 years ago, just kind of as a side project, and nobody listened to it for about 5 years, and then people started listening to it, and then I get to hang out with people like Betsy, so it's a good deal. Before we start, I think I want to give another round of applause and a big thank you to the Mannix family. I mean, it's just unbelievable. You can probably tell from this accent, I'm not from the West originally. I'm from the flat eastern North Carolina coastal plains. I joke, it was not really a joke. It's pretty true that back in the late 1600s, my ancestors came over from Scotland, went up the Cape Fear River, got off the boat, and nobody has left about a 150-mile radius since then. And then in 2005, I was like the Lewis and Clark of the Robertson family, and I moved to Wyoming. And I was drawn to Wyoming by a lot of the myths of the West, the things that you grow up hearing about. Betsy has a great partner book where she says the myth of the boundless and empty West. And I came out to the West and pretty quickly started realizing that while there are these wide open spaces and some of these myths are based in reality, it's a lot more complex and nuanced than I could have ever imagined. And that's what started me on this journey that led to my work in conservation and this podcast. And it's just this constant learning and realizing that the more I learn, the more complex it gets. And I have to say that Betsy Gaines Quammen has been instrumental in my understanding and this quest to try to understand this complex place we call the American West. And I was introduced to Betsy a few years ago, and I read her first book, American Zion, and we had a great conversation. And then she's been kind enough to talk with me on the phone as I'm trying to work through different ideas and really keeping me straight on certain issues and making sure that I do appreciate the complexity. And so her newest book, True West, which is available for sale in the tent with Fact and Fiction, is just an amazing read, and it furthered my appreciation and respect for the complexity. So, Betsy, thank you so much for everything you've done for me and then for taking the time to do this.
I am so happy to be here. I'm so happy to be in your company. I just love talking to you. Thank you, everybody who's here in the audience. And this is a pretty beautiful place.
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely pretty beautiful. Two kind of housekeeping things before we start. Number one, thankfully I can talk to Betsy, whenever she's kind enough to get on the phone with me. But I know that a lot of you folks probably have better questions than the silly ones I'm going to be asking. So I want to devote a good bit of time at the end to Q&A. Betsy, we could talk in a million different ways about the West and about your book and about your approach. But I was wondering if we could just start and set a foundation. If you could talk about how this captured your attention, because you've devoted so much of your professional life. You've got a PhD. I mean, you have devoted so much energy, so much brain power to understanding the West. Why that? Why did you choose that as your life's work?
Oh my gosh. Why? Okay. First of all, I think I was lured by mythology when I first came out here. There are a number of things that I've learned in terms of the way I understand the West. So I came out when I was 18 to Colorado because I love the idea of wilderness. And we know that wilderness is a myth. This is a place that has been lived in by generations since time immemorial. And in Colorado, it's 5 nations. Here we have the Blackfeet, the Crow, the Northern Cheyenne, the Assiniboine, Sioux. We have so many different nations that live here. And so that, I think, was my own myth, that the myth of wilderness is something that preservationists just decided that this was an empty land. And you mentioned it at the beginning. This was not an empty land. And you mentioned Lewis and Clark, which the core of discovery, and the myth of discovery, which is also something that we know, this was not a discovered land. And so these were the myths that I found were important for me. But then I came to realize that the West is full of myths. And so the idea of free land, that in the myth of manifest destiny, the idea that the West is hale and hearty and salubrious, that somehow this is a healthier place. There are any number of myths that I became interested in, wanted to better understand and understanding this place, because I love this place so much. And so that was my motivation, is to get to the bottom of it. And I'm only just at the tip of the iceberg.
And thinking about myths, when we hear these myths that are in a lot of ways, some of them are just straight up factually incorrect. It can be easy to kind of think, oh, well, myths may not be good. We need to bust all the myths. But in this book, you make a great point of saying that humans really evolved to tell stories, and we are myth-making creatures. I was wondering if you could just talk a bit more about how we as human beings use myths and have for, our whole existence, really.
Yeah, we're a myth-making species. So we're always going to have myths, and not all myths are bad. But I think what I was trying to do in writing this book is I started when we were at the very beginning of pandemic. And I was looking at what was happening when people were motivated by Western mythology amid misinformation, disinformation, and low information. So I was really worried about people moving here with a certain idea of what this place was without fully understanding that they were motivated by mythologies. And in that particular case, I'm talking about the fact that people were coming west because they thought it was healthier. And we saw, especially in resort towns, small towns, these medical facilities being absolutely overburdened. The West isn't healthier. But there was that notion. And then I saw in my own community, people who could work remotely moving in, and I live in Bozeman, and people who could work remotely, and afford places that families in Bozeman couldn't afford. And so this idea of cheap land in the West, which just goes back again since homesteaders who were coming and taking the land of indigenous people. So I thought that these myths could become toxic if they weren't unpacked and understood. And then I also saw, and this particularly in the Idaho Panhandle, this book is about the Intermountain West. So I talk about Montana, I talk about Idaho, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, Eastern Washington, and Eastern Oregon. And one of the things that I also saw accelerating during pandemic was the myth of homeland and watching extremists move into the Idaho Panhandle. Not that that was new. That's something that's been going on since Ruby Ridge and Richard Butler and Aryan Nations. But there were people who felt like they could take over communities in the West, and sort of create like-minded cultures, which I was getting panicky about that. So I thought I should write about it.
I feel like by writing about it, you obviously spend so much time researching. And I feel like that's one of the things I really loved about both your books is you get a real some insight into exactly how you go about doing your research. And from my perspective, it seems that you're not, nobody's off limits. You'll talk to everybody and anybody on all sides of the political spectrum, and you've figured out a way to really explore all the different perspectives. And there's a line at the end of, or near the end of your newest book, and you're talking about a bookstore that's in Helena, but it very well could be talking about this festival where we are. And it says, this is just an excerpt. It says, you might meet a rancher, a retired police officer, a real estate broker, a director of an environmental organization, a working mom, or even a logger come writer who occasionally skydives with Russian cosmonauts. And when I read that, it's a completely different context of what she's talking about, but that could be old salt. And I feel like we have all these people from all different parts of the country here. And so I was wondering if you could talk a bit about maybe how do you go about talking to these wide-ranging groups of people that I would think if I showed up, they would kick me out or they point their guns at me. And you're going in the Bundy's living room and spending 3 hours with them and having a cordial conversation. How do you do that?
Well, first of all, I love people. That said, there are bad guys and there are dangerous people. And so even though I'm very curious and very interested in engaging with people, I don't agree with everybody I talk to. The people that you mentioned, this is Chelsea and Charlie, who own the Montana Book Company in Helena. Oh my God, I love them so much. And that particular excerpt, I met every single person in that bookstore during one event. So that was not a random collection. Those were actually the customers there. So they attract the most marvelous people. I have this weird quirk. If I'm daunted by something, and I've been tracking militia and extremism in the West in particular, starting with the Bundys, and that's what my dissertation was about. But I have a quirk that if something makes me nervous, I have to understand everything about it, everything. And somehow that just makes me less nervous, because if I understand everything, then I don't have to speculate about it. So in this book, there are two chapters in particular that I really delve into extremism in the West. And it's really the companion piece to my first book, American Zion, which is about the Bundys' land use war in Southern Nevada. And looking at religious layers of extremism. So again, this book is about mythology, the cowboy myth, as well as the myth of homeland, as well as my own myth of wilderness. And, but it was an opportunity for me to really see what these myths are motivating in terms of changes in the West, or in terms of adding layers to layers that are already here.
And in the book, each chapter is, in a way, they build on each other, but they're also kind of freestanding. And she highlights a lot of pretty colorful characters throughout the West. And there are two that come to mind that I enjoyed reading about. One was Lance, and one was Vincent, he was mentioned towards the end. And both of these folks, you could not have been more different from them in your beliefs, in your political affiliations, just across the board. I mean, one of them admitted, said, I've been radicalized, yet you're able to have a cordial conversation. And I feel like everybody in this room can admit that we're at a point in this country where people seem to have a hard time finding the ability to talk with people who they disagree with. So I was wondering if you just give a quick sketch of Lance and who he is and your relationship with him.
I met Lance in a coffee shop in Glendive, Montana, and he had been introduced to me by a friend of a friend. And I sat down at this coffee table in this coffee shop, a very cute shop, and it was very loud, and I couldn't record him because there was so much noise. And so I was leaning and listening, and he was spitting mad. He said, I hate Democrats. I hate environmentalists. And then he was raging. And he said, I've joined the NRA. I'm buying a bunch of guns, and I've been radicalized. And I realized at that point, I'd been studying radicalization, and I was kind of wool gathering. It was kind of that feeling of, I think I'm just going to sort of stay in my head right now. And he kept talking. And then finally I heard him say, I've said this to you 3 times. Are you going to take down my information? And I kind of, pulled myself together and said, okay. And he said, come to my ranch. And I thought, oh my goodness. But then I thought, this is what the book is about. It's about hearing people out. It's about understanding where they're coming from. I've sat down in the Bundys' living room. I can go to Lance's ranch. So a couple of weeks later, I wrote him an email message. And right before I went home, after we'd have coffee and he'd invited me, the friend of the friend says, you should read Betsy's book, American Zion. And she has an extra copy in the car. And I thought, oh no, he's going to read everything I wrote about the Bundys and ranchers. And believe me, I know that the Bundys do not represent ranchers at all. But I thought, oh no, this guy is really mad. I don't want to make him upset in any way. So I did write him. I wrote him an email. And I said, I would like to come to your ranch. And this is what he wrote me back. Betsy. We must be on each other's mind. I was about ready to send off an email. I couldn't decide if I wanted to finish your book first. I'm a little over half done, which surprises me. Your book is very engaging, like being in a battle for survival. I'm not an expert, but your writing is charming, witty, and filled with sarcasm. Reminds me of a ranch woman, on which I am an expert. This is a compliment to you. My ranch wife says the apartment is open. They have an apartment they rent to hunters. So I look forward to seeing you on the 26th. I'll chill some red wine and see if I can find some tofu. Don't forget your whiteboard. I'm a slow learner. I will lock up my guns if you promise not to shoot me in the back. I will brush up on my pocketbook, rules for radicals. I might even call Saul. Feel free to contact me anytime, your friend Lance. And so I went and visited him, and we've become friends. I wore a Black Dog Ranch hat to his ranch one day, and he made me take it off. And this is his ranch hat that I love. And I've now visited him 3 times. I've introduced him to my dad, and I bought a side of beef from him. He told me, Betsy, if you and I were in charge, we'd get so much done, which is wonderful and hilarious because we couldn't agree on, we agree on basics. We agree on being good neighbors. We agree on, we don't agree on politics, but we agree on core values. And I think that's what was so important to both of us. We're friends. I mean, I adore him. And, it made me realize that as small town newspapers dry up and COVID, of course, kept us from being in relationship with each other, that there are so many opportunities to be in relationship. And so, yeah, Lance has been a great lesson, and he hasn't been radicalized. He's mad, and he doesn't like Democrats or environmentalists, but he's a really good guy.
Well, we got here about the same time yesterday, so we've been here a little over 24 hours, and thinking about the importance of that face-to-face communication, that face-to-face talk, being able to find the common ground versus just hammer each other on the silly internet and emails and social media and all that. Seeing what the Mannix family and what Old Salt is doing here, I'd love to hear just more about your thoughts on the importance of these face-to-face conversations, whether, that was a perfect example, but just any other thoughts or stories you have about how you've been able to break down barriers and talk about complicated issues and find solutions.
Focusing on community rather than focusing on national politics. I mean, because our small town newspapers are disappearing so often, we just pay attention to national media. And I think it's really important to get engaged in communities, to know your neighbors. I mean, I'm not telling you all anything you don't know. This is not great wisdom, but I do think we got out of the practice of it. And I think we did get mad at each other. I ended this book feeling so much better. I mean, things are tough. We're in a polarized environment, but people still want to be in relationship with each other. And what I worry about are communities that that are vulnerable to the extremists that I talk about. I mean, one of the things that extremism can happen anywhere. It can happen in big cities. It can happen in rural communities. But one of the things that I was kind of tracking is communities that have had maybe they were lumber communities, sawmill communities, or maybe they were a mining community that was in a bust cycle. And when people are pressured economically, and angry, rightly so, they can be vulnerable to people coming in there and telling them, well, we've got to, do an armed event, or, it's empowering to be angry. And so I think it's really important for us to be in relationship. I mean, even if, and I know there were a lot of new people who moved to the West, during COVID.
Oh yeah.
And my suggestion to them is get involved in your community, get to know your neighbors. Don't use the West as an extractive place. Don't use it as a place that you can, sort of nibble at nature, but really invest in your communities and talk to one another. And it's simple, but we've gotten out of the knack of it.
Another chapter of the book that I really enjoyed has got a great title, Chapter 7, Donkeys to Jackasses. And Betsy explores a lot of the development pressure that is happening in Montana and has been happening for the last 25 years. And I think there's some lessons you can take from the stories of that development pressure and then think about some of these agricultural communities and kind of how the pressure is moving out. I was wondering if you could just talk a bit about that chapter and about some of the maybe high level lessons that you took from learning about these people from the outside coming in and extracting value through real estate development.
Yeah, so the chapters kind of nest together, and then the next chapter is the big bad wolf. So I talk about the Yellowstone Club, and what that has meant for Gallatin County, and the prices being driven up. It's hard for people to live in Gallatin County and work for places like the Yellowstone Club and some of these fancy things that are going on at Big Sky. They don't have housing, and the way that people come in and use it as extractive. I mean, they come in for a week or two at a time. And I sort of give the history of Tim Blixseth and the development. And then in the Madison Valley, I talk about Roger Lang, who owns Sun Ranch, and how he was a predator-friendly rancher. I mean, he had wolves on his property. He's since sold the ranch. But I talked about what it means to come into the state and, in one case, be here for 5 minutes and think of it as, this is my wilderness retreat. Meanwhile, the wilderness retreats are digging into elk migration habitat. They're affecting the Gallatin River water quality. And then you have people like Roger Lang, who did move from California. He bought a big ranch and he worked with the community, to create, a weed committee so that everybody in the community is very invested in weed control. And he found something that was uniting, and he really loved the Madison Valley. And he also did wolf-friendly ranching, which I think my background is in conservation, and I never fully appreciated. And this is something that I think conservationists need to really take to heart, because there has been historically this idea that ranchers should just have wolves, or, if they can't figure out how to do it, then maybe they should do something else, which is the dumbest thing. And I think that conservationists are now starting to realize ranchers are so important in wildlife protection, and predator-friendly ranching is hard. It's really hard. And I know in Colorado, that right now wolves have been reintroduced. And so, again, I feel like wolves belong on the land. They need to be here, but it's very naive to think, oh, that's just an easy thing. It's not.
Well, I think that just speaks to your strength as a historian and a writer, is that you explore that nuance and you make it very clear there are no yes, no, right, wrong answers. I mean, maybe on the very extreme ends, but that's what I've always gotten from your work, is that I might think I have it figured out now, but it's always going to be changing, always going to be evolving. You got to keep an open mind, which I've always really appreciated. I was also going to ask you to expand a bit on COVID and kind of what that did across the West, because I know, in talking with Cole and, all the different producers here, I think everybody can agree that the meat processing business really reached a fever pitch during COVID. And in some ways, I would imagine that's what prompted Cole and his amazing team to start all of this. could you just talk a bit about how COVID acted as an accelerant, whether that's to the mythology, whether that's to the development? I mean, you've spoken a bit about that, but I'd love to hear just more about how that took what was already a pretty upward sloping curve and then just hockey sticked it straight up.
It's interesting because I think at the beginning of pandemic, there was hope that this was going to really pull us together, and it didn't. And I think part of it was because we all had such different ideas of what the pandemic meant. I mean, depending on what news you were getting and consuming. And so we all lived through pandemic with very different notions about what it meant. And that was really, that tore at communities. It was very difficult. So there was already that, finger pointing and, I'm right because I did my own research. And the truth was, is as COVID unfolded, we were learning new stuff about it every day. So people would get absolutely certain they knew everything about it. And we still don't. There's still so many questions. So that really ripped at relationships. I mean, it ripped through families. It was awful. And so, that's one thing. And then I do think that, there was this sort of idea that, there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of anger at the same time. COVID was happening. There were the Black Lives Matter protests, and some people were, in my community, there was so much support. People were so embracing, but there were people who were getting rumors on the internet that, Antifa was coming to town and I got to get my ARs I interviewed one guy who is a psychiatrist, and he was talking about, he had a client who was a gun dealer, and the gun dealer loved his job. He said, except now I hate it because so many people are buying guns. They have no idea how to handle them. They've never been to a shooting range, and they're doing it because they're afraid. And it was just, everybody had their own ideas of what was happening and what it meant.
Yeah.
And, it was, and the thing that I will sort of finish with is, when I was watching this all unfold over social media and also the folks I was tracking Stuart Rhodes, who is now in prison for 18 years.
Yep.
In fact, I visited his ex-wife who lives in Eureka, and I love her. She is such a tough cookie, and then she's so amazing. She's so funny, and she's left that movement. But I was watching Stuart Rhodes talk about Civil War at an event called the Red Pill Expo, which is a gathering of conspiracy theorists. So Stuart Rhodes, who started Oath Keepers, was on stage with people who were denying that COVID was even an issue. At lunch, they showed the video, "The Titanic Never Sank." And then they had a guy get up who talked about lizard people. And I saw this movement, people who were, medical freedom, who didn't believe that COVID exists, connecting with the militia. And so when January 6th happened, the coalition that showed up was really quite broad. And in part, it was because the militia was able to pull in people who had various ideas about the pandemic and COVID.
Wow. You've built this career of looking at the past, analyzing the past, and I would imagine that kind of, like we were talking about a trajectory earlier, you're able to look and see kind of where we've been coming from, where we're going. You mentioned earlier that you're writing this book made you hopeful or optimistic about the future. I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on where everything's going as far as here in the West. It could be with the mythologies, or it could be with the concert. You're heavily involved in the conservation world. We could talk about that forever, but I'd love just to hear about kind of your predictions for the future.
Well, I loved what Hal Herring said yesterday. And he talked about the book, The Life of Pi, which is one of my favorite books ever. It's so brilliant. And I know they made a movie about it, but the book is just phenomenal. And in the book, the end is he's the main character has told this absolutely amazing, beautiful tale. And then they discovered that, well, this tale may or may not be true, and he might have just been stranded on a desert island. But the point is that it's up to us to tell the story. And yeah, there's some pretty daunting things happening right now, but the thing that I understood in writing this book and meeting all these people, and again, I will say there are bad guys. I mean, in looking at some of the folks in the Idaho Panhandle that do spread over into western Montana and eastern Washington and Oregon, but there are so many people fighting that extremism on both sides of the aisle. They are fighting tooth and nail. They are making strides. And the story's up to us. I mean, what story do we want? People, and I make this point, the book kind of looks at the West as a myth museum.
Yeah.
And, but I talk about the fact that we're not displays. We're not fixed. The story's not over. And so we still have the opportunity to make the story we want.
I love that. And I'd love to now open it up to questions.
Thank you. Everything you say is so true from my experience. I've spent 30 years facilitating collaborative processes around natural resource issues. And it's so true that if you get people around the table to talk about a particular issue that they all have on their minds, or a community, as you were saying, they can work together. If you get them focused on their home, on their place, or an issue that all these different people have in common that they're concerned about, it's amazing how well they can work. In the meantime, we've got the social media making it look like we're lousy at it. We're not. We're very good at it, and we continue to do so. So thank you very much for your book, for getting that message out there. That's wonderful.
Thank you for your work.
Other questions? Anybody else have?
Thank you. Great conversation. I'm very curious to know if you can succinctly describe it. What is it that's making Lance so spinning mad?
He is, and I need to temper that story too, because I can't come to realize that Lance is somebody who just gets, and sage grouse protection and Bill Clinton. And I mean, he gets on these issues, public. He's a grazing allotment, and he doesn't like the management that the BLM, has sort of. He doesn't like regulations. He was mad at Bill Clinton because he had to go through a training about how to work with women. He had been involved in some government stock growers. And I need to go back to my book because I don't remember all the details, but he needed a seminar, and he said, I can't believe Bill Clinton made me take a seminar. I know how to treat women, and he doesn't. So it was, he just had these things, but you realize that as soon as you get around it, he's a huge hearted person. And I think that's all of us I was just as guilty. I got so mad, in 2020. And I think that Lance just, once you got him in conversation, you realized what a wonderful, big-hearted, caring person he is. And I think that I think most of us are. I mean, I really do. I keep going back. There are some really bad guys out there, but I think people are good.
I think we got one over this way too.
Hi, Nicole Masters had she was on a panel today. She got a huge laugh from the crowd when she said basically our food pyramid here in the United States of America, like anything the government tells you about health is just do the opposite, like meats, fats versus carbs, sugar, that sort of thing. I guess my question is, if we can't trust the government about health and food, which is why a lot of us are here, trying to get more grass-fed beef versus other, corn-fed products. Why should we trust the government about, the environment or land stewardship in general, given the track record, Forest Service, overgrazing, that sort of thing?
I don't think the government gets it perfect, nor do I think. I mean, I think there's a lot of there's a lot of room for criticism, and I think I don't quite know how to answer that question. But I also, I guess, during the process of this book, I came to realize that I believe in community initiatives. I believe in some scientific. I think universities are really helpful. I believe in nonprofit organizations. I've always been somebody who felt like it's very healthy to challenge the government. I mean, when I was working in conservation, we were challenging the BLM and the Forest Service all the time. So I think it is healthy to continue to do that. But I also think, you can find partnerships and coalitions in a variety of different ways, whether it's NGOs or ranchers or, community or rather universities.
Yeah. Just given how divisive things are now and how difficult it is to have a civil conversation over things you disagree with, what do you think Lance took away from your conversations and your relationship?
That's a really good question. And he and I have talked about it. I mean, first of all, I'm from Bozeman, so he doesn't even think Bozeman's in Montana. And and I think that, and I kind of agree with him in some ways, but I think that we saw each other as people. I mean, it goes to your point about the government being full of people. I mean, we're all people. And I mean, he said to me, if I'd never gotten to know you, I would have had a very different idea of who you are as, an environmentalist or a Bozemanite or whatever. And so I think we both walked away saying, oh my gosh, we really like each other. And that in a way is myth busting too. This idea of relationship, and this idea of being human beings and, being nuanced and not being categorized, because I think people really benefit. And I'm talking about people who are making money from vitriolic social media, politicians who are, calling various groups of people either communists or whatever it is. Once people get to know each other and kind of see the humanity in each other, those notions can get blown, and we're better for it.
We got one up front.
So I moved out here about 19 years ago, little more than half my life. So I'm not a quote unquote, original Montanan. So I'm just wondering how much worth you put on that as kind of like a political strategy for like a quote unquote real Montanan or Westerner when campaigning, things like that.
Well, that is something that's discussed quite a bit. I think that we should acknowledge the fact that this is indigenous land. So, the Crow, the Blackfeet, the Northern Cheyenne, these are Montanans that have, and before it was Montana. So I think that's first and foremost the most, fundamental answer to your question. And I think that there is a lot of pride with people who are fifth generation ranchers, who have worked the land. And so, I know that that's something that people do feel proud of. I've lived here for 31 years and I'll never be a Montanan. So I know that's a thing.
I have a question kind of along the same lines. I actually came to Montana when I was 18 years old to work for the Forest Service because I won a contest with the Isaac Walden League about if you are interested in conservation work. And the prize was you get a job with the federal government. And they told me you're going to the Kootenai National Forest and you're going to work for the Forest Service. And I grew up in the Midwest moving all around, so I didn't really have a home. And I was like, where's Montana and what's the Forest Service? And what charmed me at that very young age was the link between people and the land. And I was up in the Yak, and there was a lot of logging going on at the time. And people either were building logging roads, or they worked at a mill, or you were seasonal for the Forest Service. And the seasonals, like when I was 18, a 30-year-old seemed old to me. They would work for cash as a seasonal, and then they would hunt in the fall. They would harvest their big garden. They'd get unemployment. And so it was like semi-subsistence lifestyle. And now, as people come into Montana with very, very lot of money, and they're changing places. I lived in Bozeman 39 years ago, and I'm so glad I got to be there when it was the way it was. And I have a place in Whitefish. And these hot spots where ultra wealth is moving into, and basically the feeling of being elbowed out. And these, with remote work, people don't seem to me to have that same connection and that same humility about land and season and resources. And I'm just wondering, as you've done whatever research you've done, how do you see Montana 20 years from now?
I don't know. I feel like it's really important, again, to get communities to be thinking about this and to be doing assessments about how much development can actually happen, our water, how much water we have. But this has been happening in the West. When this housing crisis issue came up, and this whole idea of the land rush, my friend Chris Latreille, who is coming out with an amazing book. I'm so excited about it. Becoming Little Shell. His tribe was just recognized. Yeah. And he's one of the funniest people I've ever met, and he's enormously talented. And he wrote in his newsletter, which, by the way, everybody should sign up for, the Irritable Métis. He said, yeah, I'm sad people can't afford land, but welcome to the last 500 years, mofo. Yeah. So it's something, I mean, I wish I could close the gates, and I agree with you. I just don't feel like, I feel like a lot of the new people are coming in, without, that kind of sensibility, but at the same time, that has been happening. But I mean, Bozeman's so different.
I think the musician Sterling Drake, who's going to be performing this evening, I had him on my podcast, and he's just a really great guy, but he grew up in Florida, and a lot of his approach to music is he's like, I'm never going to be a native Montanan or a Westerner, but I can try to use my talents to try to serve this place and help tell these stories, and, you know, approaching it with a kind of a posture of service. And I mean, that in a way, I tried to do my little part. I used to be a conservation director, and I'm not from here. And I used to be in the real estate business selling ranches to rich people. And I decided that I wanted to use those real estate skills for something else. And so I think there are plenty of examples of people who have figured, you know, are focused in on trying to make their trajectory go a little bit better.
I will say one thing about cred, and maybe this explains why I'm really good at reconciliation. I went to University of Montana and Montana State, so I'm a grizzly and a bobcat.
Nice.
Both.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I think my question's along the lines of what you were just talking about and sharing, but focus more on our energy future. I am working right now with a nonprofit on a carbon capture project in southeastern Montana. And I just hear a lot in the conversations I have about whether it's wind or oil and gas, like whatever type of development, but that interaction that has to have also with our working landscapes and ranching. So if you can just speak a little bit about what you think that future looks like, or how to work together to ensure a successful energy future.
Well, I can tell you, I've got a podcast coming out about that exact on Tuesday with the Nature Conservancy. I've got a partnership with them, and that was the exact topic of it's based in Colorado, not Montana, but from the conversation I just recorded on Tuesday, it from my perspective, from TNC's perspective, it seems very, very hopeful. They are the amount of resources that TNC has, and the amount of brain power and the amount of data that they can gather and analyze to figure out everything from the best way to site renewable energy sites that allow for agriculture, allow for wildlife, and down to even the mining. As you're doing renewable energy, you got to have batteries. Batteries require lithium. They're doing work on how do you mine, go through the nasty process of pulling lithium out of the ground in a way that is as good as it could possibly be.
And also Northern Plains Resource Council.
Oh, yeah.
They're so great. So I know that's hooray for you.
Well, I'll toss in one more. Not
my pal,
much. My man. The 19-year guy. The 30-something years, still not. I'm 50, coming 50 years here, newcomer. The way I kind of see it is when you get your cred, is it's like what we came here for, and how you kind of peel away the onion. And it's like three things, I think. It's like, first thing is you help each other. You help your neighbor. You talk to your neighbor, and that's that community thing you were talking about. You help your neighbor. That's another one. The second one is that you live and let live. I mean, these are the things that I saw when I came here that I didn't leave for, is you help your neighbor, you live and let live, and you just cherish this environment, and you take care of the land and everything that we see around you. And kind of when you embrace those three, then you're probably here, And then in terms of like you've arrived, you know what I mean? You can stick around when you do that stuff. And then the part about how to, what to do for the future to make it better, there's one thing you can do that nobody can stop you. And it's just, you can just be decent.
Amen.
You see somebody, you be decent to them.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you change the world one person at a time.
Yeah.
One person at a time. You just be decent to one, have a good one there, check it off, move on to the next one.
That's great. Final question for Betsy. You've seen so much, both, in the present day West, and then you've dug as deep back as we can dig to learn more about it. Any kind of parting words of wisdom, anything you'd like to impart to all these super smart, engaged people that have gathered here for this, just what's really, I think, one of the most special events I've ever been to.
Oh, it's been magical.
I'd love to hear any kind of parting words, and then you can go sign some books.
Right now, I feel like we're being collectively reactive instead of collectively solution making. And part of that is being decent to each other. We're so ready to react that we're not being in relationship with each other and creating solutions. And I'm not saying that some people are really doing it, but as a society right now, I feel like there's so much collective reaction. But we need to be decent to each other, and in doing so, build relationships and come up with solutions. And to Hal's point, tell a better story. We're in control.
Isn't Betsy great? She's so awesome. And it's a pleasure to know her. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ed. That was wonderful. Thanks, Manixes, too.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread. So I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number 2, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.